as you said, you know.
Yeah.
So you going to all these different places, and even Tibet and Mongolia and everything like that. So, I mean, I guess we've already talked about it a little bit, but maybe you could just expand a little bit more about this. You feel like this, you know, humanity, the common humanity there that goes back to the very roots, you know.
Yeah. Well, I think especially with the folk music that's really coming from a place that's about just living and life and the joys and the sorrows, 欢笑和眼泪, you know, that is folk music, and anybody can play it, and that's the point. It's the music of the people. I would even argue that in modern day, probably the simpler forms of pop rock are kind of like the modern day folk music to a certain extent. And I would just love to see I say armies, but peaceful armies of musicians coming over here and learning Chinese and getting excited about it and having these kinds of collaborations. And, you know, the stronger those ties are under the surface of sort of the more the paradigm of political discussion for guiding the future. That's where that underground, that swell, the underbelly of what's happening amongst the people is where the real solidarity and the real change is going to happen. So I just hope so many more people come over here and do this. I don't want to be a novelty. People are always like, oh wow, you really picked something to get you attention. You're really a novelty. And I'm like, no, this is my life. This is how it's unfolded, and it simply is a manifestation of what's happening in the world. And my life is just sort of representative of what can happen. And I would just love to see it happening to a lot of people, or a lot of people choosing to make...
Yeah, and I think it's important that you are obviously, I mean, what I really like about you as being someone who's lived here a long time and like you, respects this culture. I sometimes feel uncomfortable when somebody comes from outside the culture and they don't speak Chinese, they don't really understand, but they've got some music, could be really cool music or really good stuff, I mean, whatever. But there's a certain attitude of, you know, I'm going to bring my stuff here and, you know, plant the seeds and everyone's going to worship me and it's really great, you know. And you're someone who doesn't fit into that mold at all. You're someone who's came, you know, from the inside, you learn Chinese, you're singing in Chinese, you know.
Writing lyrics.
Writing lyrics in Chinese. I mean, this is wonderful, you know, what you're doing. And maybe you could talk a little bit more about how Chinese music or Chinese, you know, the music scene is influencing you and changing your music.
Well, I chose to study American traditional study, learn to play some American traditional songs because of China. Because China, I just saw how deep and rich this culture is. I mean, this culture, it's, wow, just what that covers, it blows my mind.
Yeah, it's really mini cultures. It's like,
exactly. Yeah. It's just profound and shocking and amazing and overwhelming, and it humbles me constantly. So just to get to be on the edges of it, letting it infect who I am and how I function is it's a privilege. And I wish other people felt like that. I wish it wasn't a consumer-oriented approach to China, which is pretty much what defines the way Americans think about China. You make the goods, I'll consume them. I'll come there, I want you to give me what I want, which is to be important, to feel like a star, to feel special, because I don't at home. There's a lot of that. I want people to think about their approach to China with the same the golden rule, you know, treat others as you'd want to be treated, and to find a lot of meaning because of that exchange. And I just wish more of that would happen. And I think that's an important thing, is that China is such a challenge to Americans because it doesn't easily fit into their understanding of themselves as a consumer. You come over here and you serve. You don't come over here and get what you want. And I think that's okay. I've come to the point where I'm okay with that. Things don't go the way I want them to. I end up in really awkward situations. I end up having to compromise constantly. But it makes me a better person. It makes me a better global citizen. And I would like other people to experience that because it's so enriching.